All right, welcome to another episode of What's Broke Today. What we've got is a Stihl weed eater that it's a 4-stroke one, and the intake valve guide broke and it dropped the valve in the cylinder, and I priced out all the parts to actually fix this motor, and time you figured labor and parts, it was cheaper to buy a long block, which Stihl sells these at, this was, I think with taxes, like $225, maybe a little less, but yeah, I just went ahead and got the long block, which comes, it's got the crank, the rod, the piston, head already assembled with valves in it, and this part of it, just got to swap everything over. And of course, when this thing come in, it was already partially tore apart, so it already took the spark plug out, the valve cover, and all the other plastic off. So I'm just going to pull the carburetor loose, take the shaft loose, and just slide the carburetor and all the wires out all in one go. Let's pull that apart, and this gently slides out, and there's a breather hose on the back side we got to unhook and get that off, and there's that. And we got to get the fuel lines off, which I think once I get it broke free, it'll slide right off, and it did. And of course, let's see, because I haven't ever had one of these apart. Oh, it's got the pulse line on the bottom of the carburetor down there. I got to get loose. Let's slide this. I think this fuel tank will come off there now. There we go. Gotta get that out of the way, and then it's got this like pulse line on the bottom. And I might not have been close enough to the camera, I just looked, so come over here, and a lot of times these hoses, just give them a gentle twist to break them free, and then a screwdriver to kind of push them loose, and then this will slide off there, and of course push up and get the throttle cable released. Wide open. Pull that out, and then of course the carburetor will slide right off. And then the rest of this here is held on with a two Torx screws. And then number 2. That pop loose there. Let's see. Holding that, but you don't want to come free. I bet you that they just stuck. Yep. That pop free and come up, and then see what I usually do is you can get all this stuff pulled out of the way, and I just come over here and loosen up the tube. Then I can just slide that off like that. And that way I take that apart, and then we got the start hub on the back side, and we'll just take the nut off, and luckily on this it just slides up on there and the nut holds it on. And of course our pulse line, we got to get it up off there, and now if I wasn't videotaping this would go a lot easier. There we go. All right, and we can go to the front side, and take out there's only one of these screws left. He took out the top two because where the top cover slides in. And then that whole piece slides off like so. And a lot of times I put the screws back in the holes of what they go in, just so that they get back in the right spot. And then see up here we got our clutch is actually held on with Torx on here too. But we can just take our knife and reach down in here and kind of scrape it out, because the last thing we want to do is strip out one of these Torx bits here. So yeah, helps out here because the valve is laying in the cylinder, so I can just turn the piston and that's actually my engine stop. This comes right off. I always put these back in, and I ain't got too much wear on the centrifugal clutch. We can set that to the side, and then our ignition coil is held on with two of those. It's a lot simpler taking these things apart. And that sounded like something fell. Alright, so we had plastic washers that were in between the coil and the engine, so we got to make sure we get those back in. And then of course the bottom plastic is got two Torx screws holding it in. Pulled out, and that comes off, and all that leaves us with is the flywheel. And laying behind me, I think another piece fell out while I was walking. Yeah, there we go. So now we can pop the nut off and that to the side, and then yeah, and this one, the keyway in the crank is part of the flywheel, so it's one less thing you got to worry about. But I'll say that all looks right. And actually, I'll look it over real good before I start putting it together, because I make sure, you know, I've got all the same holes. Here on the back we got, yeah, I mean, you don't get things, they don't send you the wrong thing very often, but sometimes they do. And then of course the first thing we'll probably do is, that really don't look too bad. Yep. So find our keyway and line it up, and then when you get it down on there, it'll slide all the way and it locks on. And put our nut on, of course 13 millimeter, and I'll just go ahead and flip it over, and we'll put the back side on while we're here and got the gun in our hand. Like so. Get that. We got our coil, and we'll make sure we get our ground lugs on there, and get our washers up on there. And I'm just going to hold it up and get the magnet where it's not facing the coil. That helps. Get them lined up with the holes. And then a lot of these things, from the factory. I mean, these are self-threading, self-tapping screws that they don't pre-tap hardly any holes in aluminum. And say hello to Ash. This is one of my assistants, and she's got to get up here and make sure I'm doing this right, or be in the way. And I just do all these by hand, because since I'm cutting threads, you know, that kind of, it works a two-fold thing. That also works kind of like thread lock. And we'll turn that around, see what our clearance is, because that has quite a bit of slide in it. Okay, and basically, I mean, this is the lid off a box, but it basically works good for a gap gauge. And we'll just put that in there in between the coil and the flywheel, and then just loosen these up just a little. And then the magnet will suck it up to the flywheel. Now tighten them down and then just rotate it a little, and that'll come out. And then that gives us a fairly even gap across there, and close enough it'll make good connection, and that should work like a champ. And grab my plastic that was on the bottom and get it lined up. Of course, yeah, hole's not pre-threaded, so alright, and you don't want to over tighten it because that's just going through plastic. Then our next thing is, and you know, since our flywheel's already pre-tapped, and these will be going a lot easier, so let's lay that down there. And you could even put some blue thread lock on those if you wanted to. And then I'll use the coil kind of as a stop block while I tighten these up. Alright, and there we go. Our clutch, and then of course our nose cone, we'll put it up there, and it's got little alignment pins that are going to go in the holes that are already in that new block, so it lines everything up, keeps it straight, and then alright, we get that in there, and then got our little hose, and go to the box because I got new gaskets for this stuff. And I'll take a small break from the video while I clean off all these old gaskets, because they're going to take us. This one's coming off better than I thought it would, but I'll get these cleaned off and look. Alright, well, I'm back to do some more assembly. The next thing I'm going to put on is the muffler, because you know, luckily it comes with all new gaskets. So, and some of the stuff, well, if I can hang on to things, might take a little longer, because when I don't take it apart, I don't always know how it goes back together exactly. But looking at the bolts, I mean, the two rusty ones have to be the two that were in the muffler holding it on, so get the right. The other Torx bit size I was using was the 20 that I loosened up the plastic deals on that little cover, and then clean gaskets off. And luckily didn't have to clean nothing on the motor that one you got to be real careful with is, this like this carburetor adapter is kind of a plastic material, and you don't want to, put any gouges or cuts in it that, could end up causing a vacuum leak later. And we'll drop those down through there. Now I get them started, but then I got to finish them out with a screwdriver. They don't go all the way. My socket won't be. And these are T27 Torx. So I'll get those two started that go in the top. And then I got one that'll go in the bottom of the muffler. I want to get them all started just so when I tighten it up, everything's lined up like it should be. And of course, with no threads here and cutting new ones, it's a little bit tight turning, but that's okay. All right. Now see if I can hold this and put a good torque on them. All right. I'm just holding that in between my knees because that way it's at a good angle and I'm not trying to clamp it in a vise and where I could damage something else. Okay. All right. That looks good. I am done with the screwdriver. All right, and this must have roller bearings in the bottom because I don't see where you put any oil in the bottom end of this. Probably before I start this, I'm going to take the old one apart just to peek inside and make sure, but I saw no maintenance for lower end crankcase oil, even though this has valves on it like a 4-stroke and looks like a camshaft stuck in there. So next up is long screws and go through the plastic part, and then want to make sure the screws that hold the carburetor, you don't lose them because they got to be in there before you put this up on the motor. I line that up like so and I put the gasket on the ends of the bolts, and then hold it up there, and I'll look and make sure my gasket's still in the proper position, and then start tightening them up. And this, need something like this, you need tight, but don't over tighten it, because you over tighten it, you could end up breaking that plastic. I imagine there's a torque spec for these, but Stihl is not always, they protect a lot of their information, which I don't blame them, but for do-it-yourselfers, it'd be nice to have access to some of that. And then of course the next thing is our carburetor. In between it and this, always the green one always goes on first, and then our carburetor goes on, and I'll hook up the throttle cable once I put the snout back on it. But now this is aluminum, so I was actually able to I cleaned that up you know, with the scraped it, and of course it came with a new gasket to go on the front. Now let's get our, actually it even came with this new hose here. I hadn't opened the bag with all the gaskets till I started working on it, and that one was in there. And then we can slide this on and start the nuts. Alright, that's another deal. You know, you don't want a Magilla Gorilla tighten these, because these studs coming out are just going through that plastic. So we just need them down there and, you know, snug, but not over tight. But this is another thing that we had a book. I'm sure there's a torque spec for these, but I'm just gentle with it. And then of course, but there's little slots here that you push it in down there, and it goes in up here. And see, then after I hook the throttle cable up, then I can put that cover on and cover all that up. And then of course our fuel tank has holes and these rubber grommets that, which I think will be easier to pull the grommets off and put them in and then push the tank in. Because yeah, these things just slide off those studs, and then that makes them slide in easy. And then get that up there and lined up in the hole, and then it slides in nice and easy. And then of course in the back it's got to line up for one of the mounting bolts for the starter. And then on this side, I'm gonna have to go get needle nose pliers, but hook up our fuel lines next. And luckily they pretty much lay in place where they need to go. And that will go. And that's that. All right. I think next I'll go ahead and get the starter on here, because yeah, it just goes up to the back like so, and then same thing. And another thing about Stihl, you have a lot of the screws are the same size, you know, so you don't have to, you know, it's not always I have to worry about getting the right screw in the right spot. It's just separate them out by length and try and remember what kind of screws went in, you know, what. And then I'll get all three of these started. All right. And so I don't have a spark plug. I'll just stick that in there and do a nice gentle pull and make sure everything turns free and we don't got no binding. All right. Next thing is we got to get it back on the tube. And of course in this, when we slide it together, we got to get the hex of the shaft up into the clutch, which these aren't too bad because they got the way they're set up, but you know, we just slide that down, and might have to turn the blade a little. I'm gonna set that down on the ground. And oh, some of this I move around you can't see, but luckily since I took this apart, I can look and see where the, you know, there's no more of the clean showing. I'm just going to line that trigger back up and then tighten this down. Then we're going to lay that out across there and get our wires back there and whatnot. Throttle cable back in the carburetor. Oh, which easier said than done sometimes. Okay, there we go. Got that back in there. Pull that up over the top. Get it back where it belongs, and we'll pull the cable down. Alright. That back in where it belongs. Let's do a quick little pull. Yeah, I'm looking back here in the back, because I'm just moving the throttle and making sure it moves good and that it pulls at the full throttle. So then once we get that up there and that back in, I can come back with my T20 and I'm going to put this little cover back on. While I was working there, my battery went dead, but I finished tightening up that little cover, and I got the wiring harness there, and then I'll plug in the kill wires into the coil. We can take and shove our boot up through this cover and slide it down, and we got it. Alright, so now this will slide down there, and notice once I get everything lined up right, how much smoother it all goes. And the orange covers 2 through the front of the white, and then there's 1 in the rear. Okay, that's got those all tightened up, and then we got our air filter, which he's got a new one, he just didn't bring it down to me. That's why I'm not putting a new one in now. Tighten that up. Of course, I'll put it to stop. And make sure the primer works, and I don't see any fuel leaking out anywhere, and it all looks good. Got my other helper here. His name's Trouble, but I don't think he'll ever crawl up on the table, but he's a big boy. But he's part of the reason in my barn out here, I don't have mice. But, well, I was going to say, there's basically the gist of how I go about, changing stuff like that out. That I got a new spark plug for it setting up in my truck that the guy brought down. I'm going to stick the new plug in, and because I couldn't find any place that said to put lubricant in that lower end, and I don't see where unless that rubber hose that went from the carburetor down to the crankcase somehow spits fuel down there. I don't know what's lubricating it, so I'm going to do a little checking in on that, and after I do that, get the spark plug in, I'm ready to fire it up. I'll grab the camera and we'll do a little more. All right, well, I took this apart, and I don't know if you can see, but it has no lubricant in it. It's got to be getting oil, our fuel and oil mix somehow from the carburetor, from that tube going here in the side, because this, if you blow in it, you can hear it in here. But yeah, there's no place really for a reservoir, and I mean, this is just lightly oily and has the smell of gas, and hidden behind the cover, and yeah, you smell it, and it smells like gasoline, and it was sealed on with silicone. Now, of course, we got our camshaft and our interesting lifters going on to, that is just about as baby of a push rod. That thing's smaller than an 1/8 inch drill bit. So, well, I got my spark plug in, and we're going to step outside and see if I can get this thing fired up, and I'll bring the tripod and the camera with me. All right, well, we're outside with our Stihl, but I'm going to set the choke, turn it on and set it to the start, pump the primer a few times, and let's see if it runs. Hey, it did. That's pretty good. Well, I'm going to call that success, and I'll probably take my screwdriver, go out and do a little bit of fine tuning on the carburetor, and we'll want to take it easy on this because we're going to treat this just like it was brand new right out of the store. We want to do the break-in just like we did when it was new, and which part of that is no full revs on the throttle with no load till you ran through about 3 tanks of fuel. And yeah, this is two cycle mix, so it's the 50-to-1, and I always use the OEM Stihl synthetic oil with premium no ethanol fuel. That all of this little stuff, I don't, even my riding mower, I don't put fuel with ethanol in it. That I got a local station up here that sells premium no ethanol fuel, so that's what I use in all these small motors and in my lawnmower. But well, that completes another episode of What's Broke Today. This is our KM90R Stihl. We installed the short block in, got her up and running and sounding good. And I'll say, if you like this episode, give me the thumbs up for a like. Feel free to share and subscribe. That way you can see what's going to be coming up next on What's Broke Today. Thank you.